EVE Vanguard's Operation Avalon playtest is taking place right now as of this video, and will be running until July 20th. This is the latest of many opportunities to try out the game and see how it's coming along, but this playtest more than any other has drawn the ire of the community. For those who maybe don't normally watch my videos or follow EVE Online, EVE Vanguard is Fenris Creations' spin-off sci-fi extraction adventure FPS, to use their own description of the game. Set across the hostile planets of New Eden, players deploy as technologically immortal war clones onto dangerous planetary surfaces to complete high-risk missions, recover advanced hardware, raid hostile sites, and extract before escalating threats overwhelm the battlefield. First teased in EVE's May 2022 FanFest convention and later revealed in much more detail the following year, Vanguard represents another in the studio's many attempts to diversify their portfolio of games while staying within the EVE Online universe and IP. Those previous titles include EVE Valkyrie, a first-person VR space combat simulator, Gunjack, a VR arcade shooter, Gunjack 2, a broadly similar sequel to Gunjack released on a different VR platform, EVE Galaxy Conquest, a free-to-play mobile strategy game, but most notably Dust 514, a PlayStation 3 exclusive FPS title released in 2013 and shut down in 2016, and yet today in 2026 remains on the tip of everyone's tongue whenever EVE Vanguard comes up. To understand Vanguard, we first need to understand Dust 514. Dust 514 is rather widely beloved, and you'll hear no shortage of praise for the game from people who were around at the time it was released. I'm cautious to take this too authoritatively though. Dust 514's development has a rather compelling story of its own to tell, with its exclusive release to PlayStation 3 only 6 months before the release of the PlayStation 4, and to an audience of EVE Online players who unsurprisingly were used to playing their games on PC rather than console. There are other videos out there which tell the story of Dust 514's development in more detail, many of which that broke containment from regular EVE Online audiences, so if you're not aware of any of that story, I really highly recommend reading into it. That story, combined with the fact that the game hasn't been accessible in a decade, has made for some undoubtedly rose-tinted glasses. How much of that doomed fate was because of the technical elements of its release, as opposed to the actual popularity or longevity of the game, is conveniently impossible to prove. Executive producer for EVE Online and EVE Vanguard, Snorri Aunason, better known as FC Retati, certainly thinks he knows. Speaking to Rich Stanton at PC Gamer in 2023, he said, "I think if we had been on PC the whole time, the game would literally be alive, like it would just be growing and still be a part of EVE." Maybe he's right, we'll never know for sure, but the game was free to play, received generally poor reviews from critics and players, and a couple of months after release was peaking at 6,000 players, dropping down to around 1,000 as it approached its final few weeks. It's funny, if you think this trend of treating player count charts with a little too much importance is new, here's the exact same discussion happening 13 years ago when Dust 514 came out. Another thing you'll find mirrored between now and 2013 is the general reception amongst the EVE Online community. I've really struggled to find any definitive numbers or percentages for this, so I can only say this tentatively, but a lot of anecdotal evidence and community activity in the Dust 514 social spaces suggests that a lot of the game's active community were in fact not EVE Online players. Likewise, EVE's player base being isolated by both genre and platform didn't show a lot of love for Dust. While not isolated on platform, Vanguard 2 sits in a genre that doesn't exactly cross over with a space strategy MMO, even if they both share a full loot approach to PvP, so it shouldn't surprise you that the EVE Online community is not exactly in love with Vanguard so far. To further complicate things, we're going through what can only really be described as an open revolt in the gaming market right now. Players are holding developers to a higher standard than ever, right as the industry seems completely out of sync with the preferences of its consumers. There are 3 big issues hitting the video games industry at once, and Fenris Creations is jumping headfirst into all 3 of them. Gamers are getting more critical about what they're buying, development cycles are becoming longer than the lifespan of market trends, and games are getting more expensive to make. The first point is mostly one of variety. More games are released now than ever before, and it's not even slightly close. If you're into AAA games, there's one coming out every month at least, more often one a week during some of the busier months. If you're into indie games, no matter the genre, there's more like a dozen coming out every day, and that's not counting the shovelware. With this increase in volume and the comparative upping in quality for each of those titles enabled by more accessible development tools and the leveraging of controversial generative AI, gamers are becoming much more selective about what they play. Steam Replay 2025 showed us that 84% of PC gamers' time in-game is spent on titles that are at least a year old, with 40% spent on games at least 8 years old. Only 14% was spent on games that released in 2025. This trend has been going around for a few years now, but as new hardware becomes prohibitively expensive due to the ongoing chip shortages, we can expect this disparity to become only more pronounced over the next few years. As for development cycles becoming longer than the lifespan of market trends, it's important to keep in mind that this is a twofold problem. As gamers get more picky, studios are reaching for loftier ambitions to try and stand out, making big project commitments that take longer to achieve. And at the same time, algorithmic content from social media platforms like YouTube Shorts, TikTok, and Instagram Reels are allowing for trends to blow up overnight. This combined is leading to some admittedly rather funny misses where studios are putting out games clearly designed to capitalize on the hype of a genre that died out years ago. Vanguard sits at a cross-section of these two. It's 4 years since we got the first hint of EVE Vanguard's development, and so far we're only at an alpha playtesting stage, with an open alpha with 24/7 server access expected in November of this year. It's also an extraction shooter, and if you've been keeping your finger on the pulse of new releases over the last year or two, you'll have noticed that the lag time between the extraction shooter genre hype is finally hitting and the market is quickly becoming saturated. Publishers saw the meteoric rise of games like Escape from Tarkov and Hunt Showdown right as Battle Royale games were starting to plateau after years of success. And now 5 or 6 years later, we get Arc Raiders, Delta Force, Stall Zone, Arena Breakout Infinite, and perhaps one of the more sad examples, Marathon. Arc Raiders started a lot of discourse about the saturation of the extraction shooter market and whether or not there was a player base big enough to sustain all these games. Marathon just came in from the top rope to prove that that concern may have been warranted. I played Marathon. It has enjoyable gunplay, intriguing and highly reactive alive-feeling maps, and an incredibly strong design philosophy that you can see, hear, and feel. It's clear that the team behind Marathon knew exactly what they wanted to make and set about making it, but as it turns out, it may not have been what the players wanted. I'm sure a mega corporation like Sony backing the itself massive and renowned studio Bungie would not be pleased to see their game getting player counts not entirely different from that of a small Icelandic studio's first foray into FPS games on a PlayStation 3 exclusive in 2013, but that's what they got. Despite all the brick walls that EVE Vanguard is coming up against, I of course had to check it out myself. To the Vanguard team's credit, FC Ritati along with game director Scott Davis, otherwise known as FC Collins, have been putting out an admittedly captivating portrayal of what EVE Vanguard represents for both EVE Online's existing players and perhaps some curious extraction shooter aficionados too. Even I, as someone who has extremely limited experience in this genre and hasn't habitually played first-person shooters in over a decade, found their enthusiasm contagious. If you took to heart the reception that the game is currently getting on the EVE Online subreddit, you might think that I logged into something of the caliber of a 13-year-old's first attempt at a Roblox minigame, so I have to be honest here and say that with my considerably lowered expectations, I actually really enjoyed playing Vanguard. Even from the slightly less Hopium perspective, compared to its previous playtests, I felt much more in tune with the core gameplay loops, and was picking up what the game design language was putting down. What had felt very much like a tech demo in previous iterations had finally evolved into something in the shape of a game. I made a few blunders over my first couple of runs before everything fully clicked, but honestly, getting the bulk of that across to me in 30 to 45 minutes is a feat worthy of respect in and of itself. For all its flashy design and deep mechanical variety, this was something that Marathon struggled with considerably in comparison. I ran a post poll a few days ago on my channel and was surprised to see that opinion was quite a bit more split on Vanguard than I expected, but with the far dominant category of having not tried the game at all. I could never prove this, but I'm not writing a science paper, so you're gonna have to hear about it anyway. I think a lot of current Vanguard discourse is unfortunately being propped up in no small part by people who played the First Strike playtest back in 2023 and haven't really engaged with the game since then. Fenris Creations made a bold decision in making the development process so collaborative with the EVE Online community, and unfortunately one of the side effects is that it's a community not exactly known for its open-minded approach to change. And I say that as someone whose most popular video is me moaning about an EVE Online expansion. So if you're one of those people in the majority who haven't played it, and maybe you've played previous playtests long ago, I implore you to give it a try. If you still hate it, then fair enough. I would love to put out another poll to find out how many in that category aren't trying this playtest because they already got put off by a previous one, but if I put out another poll, I'm going to have to change my channel name to YouGov. What I will readily admit about Vanguard though is that it's nothing special, not yet at least. 2 or 3 years ago, and this might have been quick enough out of the gate to captivate an audience of extraction shooter players bored with their current mainstay rotation, but now Fenris are going to have to work much harder to show why people should play their game over the competition. Thankfully, one of the most intriguing elements of the game isn't even integrated yet, and may yet hold a surprise for us. One of the most romanticized features of Dust 514 was the many ways in which it tied into the core EVE Online MMO. Many of these ways were admittedly quite gimmicky and were not really practical enough to make any massive impact on either game, but it would give Vanguard something unique to any other extraction shooter on the market right now. We've heard a few things here and there about what such a connection might entail, including recovering planet-side loot and salvage that reflects the modules and materials lost in stellar engagements, but I think it's best not to speculate too hard on this. It's hard enough coming up with balanced and interesting mechanics for one game, let alone making something that seamlessly pleases the audience of 2 games in completely different genres. So I suspect whatever the connection between the games may be, it's likely to go through a few iterations before it lands on something with enough certainty that we can begin to analyze its likely impacts and enjoyability. Eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that I skipped one of the 3 industry problems that Vanguard has come up against earlier. Less eagle-eyed viewers, still blessed with the gift of sight, will have seen the thumbnail. So yes, it's time to look at the last problem. Games are getting more expensive to make. If you want a really broad understanding of the evolution of this problem, I just have to recommend Jason Schreier's recent video on the topic. To say his industry expertise is greater than mine would be to say that the ocean is slightly larger than my kitchen sink, so his explanation is going to far surpass anything I could cobble together. But specifically for EVE Vanguard, I've done a little digging. EVE Vanguard is being developed by Fenris Creations' London studio. It is, as far as I can tell, as a complete outsider, the primary project of that studio, perhaps even the only project. That studio, being in the UK, files company accounts that I can at least vaguely understand. I'm sure you're connecting the dots here. Fenris Creations UK Limited has accounts currently made up to the end of 2024, with the 2025 accounts due to be published within the next 3 months or so. In those accounts, we can see the following in Note 2 of the document on page 14. Turnover represents cost recharge to CCP in accordance with their agreement. Turnover is measured at fair value of the consideration received or receivable, excluding discounts, rebates, value-added tax, and other sales taxes. What this means in plain English is that the turnover figure in this document is basically just Fenris Creations' Icelandic parent company paying Fenris Creations UK internally at a fair value for the work they're doing as if they were an external company. This is pretty standard practice because if the Icelandic parent company just pays the UK subsidiary exactly what it costs to run, it would always come out to £0 profit and incur none of the corporation taxes applied to the company's profits. His Majesty's Revenue and Customs wants their slice of the pie, so the Icelandic parent company has to pay Fenris Creations UK at a rate that is defensible and based on fair market rates. So we know that the turnover is just coming from the Icelandic parent company, with room for a UK subsidiary to profit a bit. We know that Vanguard is their only project and seems to have been for a few years. Let's take a look at the figures for 2024. Turnover was £21 million or $28 million US. This with an average headcount of 79, and deducting the fact that the directors Hilmar Peterson and Adrian Blunt together picked up £871,541, that comes to about £254,809 per person of allocated spending. Now please, I beg of you, do not misunderstand me here. I am not saying that's the average salary in the company. Far from it. That's just the burn rate per employee when you include every cost associated with that employee. We're talking software licenses, hardware, real estate, utilities, insurances, pensions, marketing, relocation packages, employee incentive programs, and of course, yes, salaries. When you consider that this studio is literally a 7-minute straight line walk to Tower Bridge, yes, that one, and its employees will need to be paid enough to live within a reasonable commuting distance of that office, you can understand how this is not a cheap place to be. I also have to emphasize that this is not me criticizing Fenris for paying their employees well or being located in a bustling capital city. I'm just trying to paint a picture of how these things can get so expensive. When you make a few deductions, knowing that £3 million of that money wasn't spent, and there's probably some other, maybe even very small projects happening at the studio, the numbers aren't far off what you'd expect them to be for this kind of headcount in this city and these specialized jobs. We can actually get a better look at the proportion of this spending, which is raw salary here in the employees and directors section, where we can see that £6.4 million was spent in 2024 on wages and salaries, £781,000 on social security, and £382,000 on pensions. In this same document, we can also see the turnover for 2023, which is just shy of £18 million or $24 million at an average headcount of 69. Nice. Unfortunately, we can't go any further back in time to get these raw figures, since Fenris at that time met at least 2 of the UK government's criteria for being a small company, which were, at the time, a turnover of less than £10.2 million, a balance sheet of less than £5.1 million, and no more than 50 employees on average. Again, only 2 of these conditions need to be met to be a small company, which by nature of its classification does not need to report its turnover in its company accounts. We can make a few guesses here though. First of all, we know that in 2022 their average number of employees was 68, very close to that of 2023. And secondly, we know that in 2022, Fenris claimed £1.8 million in video games tax relief, compared to their £2.2 million of video games tax relief claimed in 2023. So it would be fair to assume that development costs at that time were broadly similar to that of 2023, about 18% lower if we generously take the video games tax relief as the main indicator. This would make 2022 turnover for the UK subsidiary paid to them by CCP's Icelandic parent company about £15 million or $20 million. Someone who knows the ins and outs of the UK's video game tax relief program at that time could probably make a more precise estimate, but because that program's eligibility depends on a whole bunch of factors, like whether that money is spent in the UK, the European Economic Area, or further afield, we're only ever going to be able to estimate. Going back another year to 2021, we know that they claimed £1.6 million in video games tax relief, or 11.1% less than 2022. For 2020 and 2019, despite being a small company, Fenris published turnover figures of £6 million and £13 million respectively. This though is getting into muddy water, as when we go back that far, we're likely getting into the doomed fate of another EVE spin-off game, Project Nova, an Unreal Engine 4 FPS in the EVE universe announced in 2016, being created in collaboration with Sumo Digital, a development company in Sheffield, England. Probably best known at that time for their co-development work on Hitman, their porting of a few racing titles, and being handed the reins to Little Big Planet 3 after the franchise's original developers became busy with other projects. That game was directed once again by FC Ritati, and during its 2018 preview to Stephen Mesner at PC Gamer, it was described as being persistent, designed for ongoing live service development rather than the start of a franchise with sequels of its own. Mesner was pretty gloves off in his description of the game 2 years into development as disappointingly boring and mundane, but praised the underlying feel of the gunplay. Project Nova was officially cancelled in 2020, so to be extremely fair to Fenris, I'm going to limit our interpretation of money that's going right into EVE Vanguard as 2022 or later, since that's the year we first heard about the project. Now we need to estimate 2025 and 2026. Unfortunately, since the filings aren't out yet, I'm just going to have to do that by taking a linear extrapolation of the years we've estimated so far. That puts 2025 at £24 million or $32 million, and 2026 at something like £14 million or $19 million so far. I cannot emphasize enough that this is napkin math made with a lot of assumptions, and the margin of error could genuinely be like 50% here, so do not quote these numbers as some sort of fact. I've shown you how I got them, make your own judgment about my methodology. But if we total these up, we get around £92 million on this game's development so far, or $123 million. For what it's worth, while Fenris was a subsidiary of Pearl Abyss, we got to know their revenue every year. So I'm going to put that alongside our estimates of EVE Vanguard's development costs and what percentage of EVE Online's revenue that represents. I'm very sure that it's not just EVE Online money going into this project though, as with years under Pearl Abyss and now collaborations with Google DeepMind and Andreessen Horowitz, I'm sure there are other revenue streams contributing to new projects like this, even if not directly. For comparison, 2024's Black Myth Wukong was developed for $70 million per Bloomberg News. EA's 2023 flop Immortals of Avium came in at around $125 million according to leaks from a former employee reported by IGN, and 2015's The Witcher 3 was at around $81 million, as confirmed by a somewhat surprising, completely transparent confession from CD Projekt Red. These games were each developed in vastly different circumstances, each to very different levels of acclaim and success, but I wanted to give an example of what you can get, or at least could get, for this kind of budget. I've heard a lot of opinions about EVE Vanguard from the perspective of playing the game, and somehow even more from the perspective of managing a company. So I do want to throw my hat in the ring on just one observation that I think a lot of people keep making and don't really understand. No matter how bad these numbers look, no matter how many spin-offs are cancelled or fail, Fenris Creations is not going to just focus on EVE. This is becoming a rather understandably relitigated point every time Fenris tries to tease a new project or releases a big update for anything other than their flagship MMORPG. There's a few reasons why Fenris isn't going to do that, and why honestly they shouldn't do that. Do you know how complicated and challenging it is to make a game? You need capital, you need specialized employees with good cohesion, you need to have experience and make mistakes, you need people to care about who you are and what you're making. You know who has that? Studios like Fenris Creations. I'm not saying Vanguard or Valkyrie or Project Nova were good ideas, I'm going to leave that for you to decide, but it is always going to be in their interest to invest some of the money they get from EVE into the chance of diversifying their income with another successful game. Here's one way to look at it. If Fenris wants to make a steady, relatively safe 6.93% profit every year on their money, they could do that right now. It's called government bonds. Hell, if they wanted to play a little riskier, investing in the US stock market has a compound annualized growth rate of 9% over the last 20 years. This is an opportunity cost of sorts. Turning money into slightly more money isn't really that challenging at all, but that's not really what game development is about. At its best, it's about the human creativity and art that goes into a game, and even at its worst, it's about higher risk investment with the potential to make profits in the hundreds of % when a game is a hit. So the argument goes that this money should be invested into EVE Online. But what would you have them do? They could blow it all on marketing, but there is ultimately a limit on this game's audience, just like any other, and EVE Online is considerably more niche in its appeal than most. They could put it into development, but aside from quality of life changes here and there, big injections of cash into the development of the game means one thing. If you're an EVE Online player like me, then please make sure you're sitting down before I say this word. It means change. I'm mostly joking, of course, that EVE Online players would universally hate any such change, as there's no doubt a lot of work that could be done to the game with positive reception. But when you have one significant money-making property responsible for employing something like 200 people at this point, the idea of making big sweeping changes is perhaps riskier than any shot-in-the-dark first-person shooter project. Just something to think about, really. I know I'm being frustratingly fence-sitting about all this, but I know that a lot of the negativity surrounding Vanguard is deserved, and almost all of it is well-meaning, even if slightly misguided. Players' concern about the company's financial performance comes from a desire to keep their favorite MMO in safe hands. So even if it can result in some pretty toxic community conversations here and there, it is put forward with good intention. If you have thoughts about EVE Vanguard, I'd love to hear them in the comments section below, but let's try and keep them good faith and constructive. If you have any extra information or maybe some expertise that could help shed further light on any of the topics I touched on today, then definitely drop them in the comments too, so that we can all understand things a little bit better. If you want to help support the channel, consider buying your next EVE Online pack, subscription, or Plex from marqueedragon.com using the link in the video description. Use coupon code BILL at checkout for 3% off your order. I've also got YouTube membership enabled now. It's 99 cents, and for that you'll get access to my monthly video where I go through some of the interesting comments for each month, more of an unscripted rant if I'm honest, and I'm sure I'll have more casual unscripted content available for members too, as and when the mood arises. I really appreciate everyone that already signed up, as it's all helped me invest in the software and hardware I need to keep making better videos.